The deafening crack of thunder masked Penelope Rowe's cries as rain lashed mercilessly against her battered frame. She struggled against the rough hemp binding her wrists to the wooden post in Whisperwood's town square, the same post where drunks and thieves were often tied for public humiliation. But Penelope was neither just a woman who dared speak her mind in a town that valued silence from its women above all else. The year was 1878, and the small Montana settlement of Whisperwood operated by rules as unforgiving as the wilderness surrounding it. Penelope's crime, according to Judge Morrison, was inciting unrest when she publicly questioned the hasty hanging of a young man accused of stealing horses. Now she stood as an example, her soaked calico dress clinging to her trembling body as the late September storm intensified. 4 hours, Judge Morrison had declared. 4 hours in the rain ought to teach you the value of a woman's silence. 3 hours had passed. The townsfolk had long since sought shelter, abandoning her to the elements as darkness fell. Her honey-brown hair hung in sodden ropes around her face, and her lips had taken on a bluish tint. She wasn't certain she would survive the final hour. Then she heard the steady splash of boots through puddles. Through the curtain of rain, she made out a tall figure approaching on horseback. Fear gripped her heart. Some men in Whisperwood saw a woman tied up alone as an opportunity rather than a punishment to witness. The horse stopped. A man dismounted, his features obscured by the brim of his hat and the relentless downpour. He approached slowly, and Penelope pressed herself against the post, as if she could somehow melt into the wood. "Miss Rowe." His voice was deep but gentle, carrying over the storm. She raised her head slightly, rain streaming down her face. "If you've come to gawk, sir, I'd prefer you moved along." The man stepped closer. In the dim light from a nearby shop window, she could make out his face, strong jaw covered in stubble, kind eyes assessing her condition. She recognized him vaguely: Fletcher Wade, a cowboy who worked at the Cross Creek Ranch outside of town. They'd exchanged pleasantries at the general store once or twice, nothing more. Without a word, he pulled a knife from his belt. Penelope flinched, but instead of threatening her, he reached behind the post and began sawing at the ropes. "What are you doing?" she gasped. "The judge said 4 hours. I've still got 1 to go." "The judge is a fool," Fletcher replied, his jaw tight with anger. "And no one deserves this, least of all for speaking the truth." The ropes gave way, and Penelope's arms fell limply to her sides, pins and needles shooting through her numbed limbs. She nearly collapsed, but Fletcher caught her, supporting her weight effortlessly. He looked down at her, rain dripping from his hat brim. "You're coming home," he said firmly, as if the matter was settled. "Home?" she questioned weakly. "I can't go back to my place. They'll just drag me out again come morning." Fletcher's expression was resolute. "Not your home. Mine. My cabin's far enough from town that Morrison and his lackeys won't bother looking there, at least not tonight." Before she could protest, he lifted her onto his horse with surprising gentleness, then mounted behind her. His strong arms reached around to take the reins, creating a protective circle that both steadied her and provided unexpected warmth. "Why are you helping me?" She managed through chattering teeth as they rode away from town, the rain still pounding down around them. Fletcher was quiet for a moment. "Because it's the right thing to do," he finally said. "And because I've been watching you for longer than you realize, Miss Rowe." The confession hung in the air between them as Fletcher's horse carried them into the darkness, away from Whisperwood, and toward an uncertain future. Penelope awoke to unfamiliar surroundings, a small but tidy cabin with a fire crackling in the stone hearth. She was wrapped in several thick blankets, her wet clothes replaced by an oversized man's shirt and a pair of wool socks. For a panicked moment, she wondered who had changed her, until she spotted an elderly woman dozing in a chair near the fire. "Mrs. Blackburn." Penelope's voice was hoarse from hours spent in the rain. The woman startled awake, her weathered face breaking into a smile. "There you are, child. Fletcher was worried sick when you wouldn't wake. Fever took hold something fierce. How long have I been here?" "2 days now. Fletcher rode out to fetch me the night he brought you in. Didn't think it proper to tend to a lady's needs himself." Mrs. Blackburn approached, pressing a cool hand to Penelope's forehead. "Still warm, but better than yesterday." The door opened, bringing a gust of cool autumn air. Fletcher entered, carrying an armload of firewood. When he saw Penelope sitting up, relief washed over his features. "You're awake," he said simply, setting down the wood. "Thanks to you." Penelope managed a weak smile. "Though I fear I've caused you considerable trouble." Fletcher shook his head. "No trouble at all." Mrs. Blackburn gathered her shawl. "I'll head back now that she's awake. My Henry will be wondering where I've got to." She patted Fletcher's arm. "You know where to find me if she takes a turn." After the older woman departed, an awkward silence filled the cabin. Fletcher busied himself with the fire, adding logs carefully. "The clothes," Penelope began hesitantly. "Was it Mrs. Blackburn who—" "Yes," Fletcher assured her quickly. "I waited outside until she had you settled." Penelope nodded, relieved. "Thank you for that consideration. And for saving me." Fletcher finally turned to face her properly. In the warm firelight, Penelope noticed details she'd missed before, the crinkles around his blue eyes that suggested he smiled often, the scar that ran along his jawline, the way his sandy hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "Are you hungry?" he asked. "Starving," she admitted. Fletcher moved to the small stove in the corner, stirring a pot of what smelled like venison stew. As he worked, Penelope took in her surroundings more carefully. The cabin was simple but comfortable, one main room with the fireplace, a table with 2 chairs, a small kitchen area, and what appeared to be Fletcher's bed, which she currently occupied. A curtain partially concealed another small area, likely where he'd slept while she recovered. "You've been very kind," she said as he brought her a bowl of stew. "But I can't stay here forever. Judge Morrison won't simply forget what happened." Fletcher sat in the chair beside the bed. "What exactly did happen, Miss Rowe?" "I heard talk in town about you causing trouble at the hanging, but folks tell different versions." Penelope's hands tightened around the bowl. "Timothy Grier was 19 years old. They accused him of stealing horses from the Holloway Ranch, but he swore he was innocent. The trial, if you could call it that, lasted all of 15 minutes before Judge Morrison sentenced him to hang." She met Fletcher's eyes. "I was there because I'd taught Timothy to read last winter. He wasn't a thief. He was working to save money to head east for schooling." She took a shaky breath. "When they put the noose around his neck, I couldn't stay silent. I demanded evidence, a proper trial. Morrison had his deputies drag me away, and afterward he decided to make an example of me." Fletcher's expression darkened. "Morrison's justice has always been selective, especially when the Holloways are involved." "You believe me, then?" Penelope asked. "I do." Fletcher's gaze was steady. "But Whisperwood isn't safe for you now. Morrison won't take kindly to someone interfering with his punishment." "I have nowhere else to go," she admitted. "I came west as a schoolteacher 3 years ago. My family's back in Boston, and I haven't enough saved for passage home." Fletcher was quiet for a long moment. "You can stay here until we figure something out. No one will look for you at a bachelor cowboy's cabin." "People will talk," Penelope said softly. A hint of a smile touched Fletcher's lips. "People always talk, Miss Rowe. But out here, we're far enough away that their words can't reach us." As Penelope recovered over the next few days, she learned more about Fletcher Wade. He'd come west from Pennsylvania after the war, seeking open spaces and honest work. He'd been at the Cross Creek Ranch for 5 years, saving to buy his own land someday. The cabin belonged to him, built with his own hands on a parcel of land the ranch owner had allowed him to use. Fletcher, in turn, discovered Penelope's story. How she'd left Boston seeking adventure and purpose, believing she could bring education to children on the frontier. How Whisperwood had welcomed her initially, then gradually stifled her as she refused to bend to their expectations of proper female behavior. They wanted a meek schoolmarm who would teach their daughters to be good wives and nothing more. She explained one evening as they sat by the fire. She was finally strong enough to move about the cabin. When I started teaching the girls mathematics and science alongside the boys, the complaints began. Fletcher watched her as she spoke, admiring the passion that animated her features. "You don't strike me as someone who gives up easily." "I'm not," she said with determination, "but I'm beginning to think my battle isn't in Whisperwood." On her 5th day at the cabin, Fletcher returned from work with troubling news. "They're looking for you," he said without preamble. "Morrison's put out word that you escaped punishment and need to be brought to justice. There's talk of theft now too, claiming you stole items from the general store before you disappeared." Penelope paled. "That's absurd. I've never stolen anything in my life. Morrison needs to save face." "Making you a criminal is easier than admitting he was wrong to tie a woman to a post in a thunderstorm." Fletcher ran a hand through his hair. Some of the ranch hands were talking about searching the outlying areas. It's only a matter of time before someone thinks to look here. That night, Penelope couldn't sleep, her mind racing with fears of being discovered and dragged back to Whisperwood. Near dawn, she made a decision. She dressed in the clothes Mrs. Blackburn had brought her, a simple dress that was a bit too large, and began gathering her few possessions. Fletcher found her preparing to leave. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. "I can't put you at risk any longer," she explained. "If they find me here, you'll be punished too." "And where will you go?" Fletcher challenged. "The nearest town is 30 miles away." "I'll manage." But even as she said it, uncertainty crept into her voice. Fletcher stepped closer, gently taking the small bundle from her hands. "There's another way, Penelope." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the intimacy of it made her breath catch. "The ranch owner, Mr. Ellis, is a fair man," Fletcher continued. "He needs a teacher for his children and those of his workers. There's a small house on his property where you could stay, far from Morrison's reach. You've spoken to him about me." Penelope wasn't sure whether to be grateful or indignant. "I had to tell someone I trusted why I've been distracted these past days," Fletcher admitted, a hint of color touching his cheeks. "And yes, when he heard your situation, he offered to help." Penelope studied Fletcher's face, searching for any sign of deceit or ulterior motive. She found only genuine concern. "Why are you doing all this for me?" she asked softly. "We barely knew each other before that night." Fletcher hesitated, then spoke with careful honesty. "I noticed you the first day you arrived in Whisperwood 3 years ago. You wore a blue traveling suit and looked both terrified and determined." His voice grew softer. "I've watched you stand your ground against men twice your size at town meetings. I've seen you stay late at the schoolhouse to help children who struggled. I've admired your courage from afar, Miss Rowe." The confession hung between them, unexpected and profound. "You never spoke to me," Penelope said. "What would a refined Boston schoolteacher want with a rough cowboy?" Fletcher's smile held a hint of self-deprecation. "But when I saw you tied to that post in the rain, I couldn't stand by any longer." Penelope felt something shift inside her, a recognition that this man had seen her, truly seen her, when she thought herself invisible. "I'll speak with Mr. Ellis," she said at last. The Ellis Ranch was larger than Penelope had imagined, a sprawling operation with a main house, bunkhouse, barns, and several smaller dwellings for married workers. Mr. Ellis, a barrel-chested man with kind eyes, welcomed her without judgment, and his wife, Clara, immediately took Penelope under her wing. The small house promised to Penelope turned out to be a cozy two-room cottage near the main house. Mrs. Ellis helped her settle in, providing clothes, linens, and basic necessities. "Fletcher's never asked for anything in all his years working for us," Clara confided as she helped Penelope arrange the small living space. "So when he came to Robert asking for help for you, well, we knew it must be important." Penelope felt her cheeks warm. "He's been very kind." Clara's knowing smile suggested she suspected more than kindness was at play. "He's a good man, one of the best we've ever had working here. Keeps to himself mostly, but the children adore him, and he's gentle with the horses when others lose patience." That evening, Fletcher arrived at her cottage door, hat in hand. "I wanted to make sure you were settling in all right." "More than all right," Penelope assured him. "Your employers are remarkably generous. They're good people." Fletcher shifted his weight, suddenly looking boyishly nervous. "I brought you something." From behind his back, he produced a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. Inside, Penelope found a leather-bound book, a collection of poetry by Emily Dickinson. "How did you know?" she breathed, running her fingers over the embossed cover. "You mentioned once at the general store that you missed having proper books to read." Fletcher's smile was hesitant. "I ordered it from Denver months ago, thinking I might give it to you for Christmas. As a friendly gesture." The thoughtfulness of the gift, not just the book itself, but the fact that he had remembered such a casual comment, touched Penelope deeply. Life at the Ellis Ranch settled into a pleasant rhythm. Penelope began teaching the Ellis children and those of the ranch workers each morning. In the afternoons, she helped Clara with household management and correspondence. The specter of Judge Morrison and Whisperwood faded as October gave way to November, though Penelope remained cautious, rarely venturing beyond the ranch boundaries. Fletcher found reasons to visit her cottage regularly, bringing firewood, offering to fix a squeaky door, sometimes simply stopping by after his day's work to share news of the ranch. Their conversations grew longer, more comfortable, as they discovered shared interests in literature, natural science, and music. On a crisp November evening, Fletcher invited Penelope to join him for a ride to see the sunset from a nearby ridge. Though she hadn't been on a horse since childhood, Penelope agreed, trusting Fletcher's expertise. He led her to the stables and introduced her to a gentle mare named Daisy. "She's steady and patient," he assured Penelope. "Perfect for a beginner." With Fletcher's guidance, Penelope mounted successfully, though not without a few ungraceful attempts that left them both laughing. He showed her how to hold the reins properly, his hands warm as they adjusted her grip. They rode at an easy pace, Fletcher constantly checking to ensure Penelope was comfortable. The land around the Ellis Ranch was beautiful, rolling hills dotted with pines, a small creek cutting through the property, mountains rising majestically in the distance. "It's breathtaking," Penelope said as they reached the ridge Fletcher had promised. The setting sun painted the sky in vibrant oranges and pinks, the golden light making the autumn landscape glow. Fletcher helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist perhaps a moment longer than necessary. They stood side by side, watching as the sun slipped below the horizon. "I never thought I'd find such peace out here," Penelope admitted. "When I first came west, I imagined bringing civilization to the frontier. Now I realize the frontier has its own civilization, its own beauty and wisdom." "It changes you," Fletcher agreed, "for better or worse." For better, I think, Penelope turned to him. At least in my case. In the fading light, Fletcher's eyes held a warmth that made Penelope's heart quicken. "Penelope," he began, his voice low and serious, "I need to tell you something." Before he could continue, the sound of approaching horses interrupted them. Fletcher tensed, instinctively moving in front of Penelope as 4 riders appeared on the trail below. "Get on your horse," he said quietly. "We need to go." "What is it?" Penelope asked, though she was already moving toward Daisy. "I recognize 2 of those men," Fletcher said grimly. "Morrison's deputies." They mounted quickly, but it was too late. The riders had spotted them and were changing direction, heading directly for the ridge. "Follow me," Fletcher said, leading Penelope away from the approaching men, taking a narrow trail that descended the back of the ridge into a stand of pines. They rode hard, Penelope clinging to her saddle, grateful for Fletcher's choice of a steady mount. Behind them, she could hear shouts and the thunder of pursuing hooves. "There's a place we can hide," Fletcher called over his shoulder. "Just a little further." The trail wound through increasingly dense forest. Just when Penelope feared they'd be caught, Fletcher led her off the path into what appeared to be solid underbrush. Behind the screen of vegetation, however, was the narrow entrance to a small box canyon. Fletcher dismounted quickly, helping Penelope down. "Stay quiet," he whispered, leading the horses deeper into the canyon where a small stream provided water. They stood in tense silence, listening as the riders passed by on the main trail. Minutes stretched agonizingly until the sounds faded. "They'll circle back when they realize they've lost us," Fletcher said. "We need to stay here until dark, then make our way back to the ranch." As the initial fear subsided, Penelope realized how cold it had grown with the setting of the sun. She shivered, and Fletcher immediately removed his coat, draping it around her shoulders despite her protests. "I'm sorry," he said, his expression troubled. "I shouldn't have brought you out here. I didn't think they'd venture this far from Whisperwood." "You couldn't have known," Penelope assured him, drawing his coat tighter around her. It smelled of him leather, pine, and something uniquely Fletcher. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped further. Fletcher gathered some dry brush and branches, creating a small, nearly smokeless fire in the shelter of a rock overhang. They sat close together, sharing what little food Fletcher had in his saddlebag jerky and a couple of biscuits left from his lunch. "Some romantic sunset ride this turned out to be," Fletcher said with a rueful smile. The casual admission that he'd intended it as romantic made Penelope's heart skip. "I was enjoying it quite a bit before we were interrupted," she offered. Fletcher looked at her intently. "You were?" "Very much so." Penelope found courage in the firelight and Fletcher's vulnerability. "In fact, I've enjoyed all our time together these past weeks." Fletcher's hand found hers in the growing darkness. "When I saw you that night in the rain, something changed for me," he confessed. "I'd admired you from afar for so long, but seeing you there, still defiant despite everything, I knew I'd never forgive myself if I didn't help you. And now," Penelope asked softly, "now I can't imagine my life without you in it." Fletcher's voice held a certainty that made Penelope tremble. "I know it's fast and perhaps foolish, but these weeks have been the happiest I've known." In the small canyon, with danger still lurking outside, Penelope found herself on the edge of something profound. The proper Boston schoolteacher in her cautioned restraint, but the woman who had survived being tied to a post in the rain recognized the rare gift before her, a man who valued her mind, admired her courage, and saw her completely. "It's not foolish," she whispered. "Not if I feel the same way." Fletcher's eyes widened slightly, hope kindling in their depths. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward until his lips met hers. The kiss was gentle at first, a question more than a demand. When Penelope responded, her hands moving to his shoulders, it deepened into something that spoke of longing finally fulfilled. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the moment you woke up in my cabin." Penelope laughed softly. "Even with my fever and looking a fright, you could never look a fright to me," he said with such sincerity that Penelope had to kiss him again. They returned to the ranch well after midnight, having waited until they were certain the search party had moved on. Mr. Ellis himself met them at the stables, his face lined with worry. "They came here looking for you, Miss Rowe," he said gravely. "Claimed you were a fugitive from justice." Fletcher's posture stiffened. "What did you tell them?" "That I hadn't seen anyone matching her description," Ellis replied. "But they searched the bunkhouse anyway. Thankfully, they didn't insist on searching the main house or the workers' cottages." He looked at Penelope apologetically. "I'm afraid they'll be back, though." One of them mentioned setting up patrols around the area. The news cast a shadow over their evening's revelations. Penelope realized that no matter how idyllic her time at the Ellis Ranch had been, she couldn't escape her past indefinitely. "I need to clear my name," she said firmly. "I can't live like this forever, looking over my shoulder, putting all of you at risk." "How?" Fletcher asked. "Morrison controls the law in Whisperwood." "But not outside it," Mr. Ellis interjected. "The territorial marshal visits Fort Collins monthly. He's due next week. If you could get your case before him, you might find a fairer hearing." Hope flickered in Penelope's chest. "Is Fort Collins far?" 3 days' ride, Fletcher said thoughtfully. "But it's dangerous country, especially with winter coming on." "I'll go with her," Mr. Ellis offered. "My business partner there has been asking me to visit for months." Fletcher shook his head. "With respect, sir, I should be the one to accompany Miss Rowe. This began with me, and I intend to see it through." The journey to Fort Collins proved more difficult than anticipated. Early winter storms had made the trails treacherous, and twice they were forced to seek shelter in abandoned line shacks when the weather turned dangerous. Yet these challenges only strengthened the bond between Penelope and Fletcher, as they relied on each other for survival and companionship. During the long evenings in these rustic shelters, they shared stories of their pasts, their hopes for the future, and their growing feelings for one another. Fletcher spoke of his dream to establish his own ranch someday, while Penelope confessed her longing to create a school where girls could receive the same education as boys. "We could do both," Fletcher suggested tentatively on their second night. "A ranch with a school. Land for cattle, horses, and learning." The casual "we" didn't escape Penelope's notice, nor did the implication of a shared future. The idea took root in her heart, a possibility that seemed both terrifying and perfectly right. They reached Fort Collins on a clear December morning. The territorial marshal, a gruff but fair-minded man named Abrams, agreed to hear Penelope's case after Fletcher advocated passionately on her behalf. "Judge Morrison has overstepped his authority many times," Marshal Abrams acknowledged after listening to Penelope's account. "I've had complaints before, but nothing so clear-cut as this." He fixed Penelope with a serious gaze. "Would you be willing to provide sworn testimony? It won't be easy. Morrison has friends in the territory." "I would," Penelope said firmly. "What happened to Timothy Grier was wrong, and what happened to me was wrong. If my testimony can prevent it happening to others, I'm willing to face whatever consequences come." The marshal nodded, impressed by her resolve. "Very well. I'll ride to Whisperwood next week to investigate these claims formally. In the meantime, I can provide you with a document stating you're under my protection as a witness in an official inquiry." That night, in the modest hotel where they had taken rooms, propriety demanded separate accommodations despite their growing closeness. Fletcher knocked softly on Penelope's door. When she opened it, he stood in the hallway looking uncharacteristically nervous, his hat in his hands. "May I come in?" he asked. "Just to talk," he added quickly, mindful of her reputation. Penelope stepped aside, allowing him entrance but leaving the door slightly ajar for propriety's sake. Fletcher paced the small room for a moment before stopping abruptly. "I've been thinking about what happens after all this is resolved." "As have I," Penelope admitted. "I care for you deeply, Penelope," Fletcher said, his voice earnest. "These past weeks have shown me what kind of woman you are: brave, principled, kind. I know we haven't known each other long in the conventional sense, but out here, time measures differently." Penelope's heart raced as she recognized the direction of his words. "Fletcher, please, let me finish before I lose my nerve," he said with a smile that melted her resolve. "I don't have much to offer yet, just my savings, my skills, and the promise that I would spend every day trying to make you happy. But if you would consider becoming my wife, I swear to you that we would build that dream together: the ranch and the school." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, a simple silver ring with a tiny blue stone. "It was my mother's," he explained. "She gave it to me before she died, said I should give it to a woman of substance when I found her." His eyes met Penelope's. "I've found her." Tears welled in Penelope's eyes. 6 weeks ago, she had been tied to a post in the rain, alone and afraid. Now she stood before a man offering her not just rescue, but partnership, a future built on mutual respect and growing love. "Yes," she whispered, extending her hand. "Yes, I will marry you, Fletcher Wade." His hands trembled slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into a tender embrace that held all the promise of their future. Marshal Abrams was as good as his word. He rode to Whisperwood the following week, conducting a thorough investigation into Judge Morrison's practices. What he discovered went beyond Penelope's case: a pattern of corruption involving false accusations against those who opposed the judge or his allies among the wealthy ranchers. Timothy Grier's hanging could not be undone, but the marshal's investigation cleared his name posthumously. More importantly, Judge Morrison was removed from his position and faced territorial charges for abuse of power. Penelope was formally exonerated of all charges, though her reputation in Whisperwood remained mixed. Some residents welcomed the exposure of corruption, while others resented the outside interference in local affairs. It mattered little to Penelope. By spring of 1879, she and Fletcher had married in a small ceremony at the Ellis Ranch, with Clara Ellis and Mrs. Blackburn fussing over the bride like proud mothers. Mr. Ellis gave the couple a generous wedding gift, a parcel of land adjacent to the ranch, with a small stream running through it and enough good grazing for Fletcher to start his own modest herd. They built their home together that summer, a sturdy cabin with large windows to let in the light Penelope craved, and extra rooms for the future they planned. One room was designated from the start as a schoolroom, where Penelope began teaching the children of nearby homesteaders alongside the lessons she prepared for her future children. On their first anniversary, as they sat on the porch of their home watching the sunset paint the sky in colors reminiscent of that first ride they'd taken together, Fletcher took Penelope's hand. "Any regrets?" he asked, searching her face. "About leaving your Boston life behind?" "About marrying a simple cowboy," Penelope smiled, leaning into his embrace. "The only simple thing about you, Fletcher Wade, is how simply and completely I love you." Her hand rested on her slightly rounded belly where their first child grew. "I found more than a home with you. I found my place in the world." Fletcher's hand covered hers, his expression filled with wonder at their growing family. "That night in the rain," he said softly, "when I cut you free and said you were coming home. I never imagined home would become wherever we are together." As darkness fell, the lights in their cabin windows glowed warm and welcoming, a beacon of the life they had built from adversity. A testament to love that had begun in the worst of circumstances, but flourished into something beautiful and enduring.